Tonight's topic is I changed my mind. The motions to rescind and amend something previously adopted. All of the information for this presentation was taken from Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised 12th edition. So we're going to do a pretest, 5 questions, and these are a little bit complicated, but I think that will help you to get a flavor for these 2 motions. So question number 1, you're a member of the Fat is Beautiful Society. At the January meeting, the organization adopted a motion presented by the Attire Committee that the official colors of the society will be black and white. You voted against this motion. The next item of business is the awards banquet. The chair of the committee, Shirley Wilson, has been recognized. But before she begins to speak, you rise and address the chair and give notice of your intention to offer an amendment to the recently adopted motion. Now, which response by the president is correct? Is it A, does the president say to the secretary, please note in the minutes that Frances Jackson has given notice that she plans to make a motion on this previously adopted motion? Or is it B, the motion to amend something previously adopted is not an interrupting motion? That motion is not in order at this time. The chair of the awards banquet has the floor. Write down what you think is the right answer, A or B. Just write it down. Second question. Per the previous notice given at last month's meeting, I move to amend the previously adopted motion on the official colors of the society by striking out black and white and inserting royal blue and gold. If the motion is adopted, the motion will read that the official colors of the society will be royal blue and gold, and that motion is seconded. The chair states the motion. When she asks for debate, Mary Jones raises her hand. Mary Jones says, I move to amend the motion by adding that female members will wear royal blue dresses with gold scarves, while male members will wear royal blue ties and gold dress shirts. And that amendment is seconded. Here's the question. If the amendment is adopted, what vote is required to adopt the main motion as amended? If the amendment is adopted, what vote is required to adopt the main motion as amended? A, majority vote, or B, 2/3 or majority of the entire membership? Write down your answer. Is it A or B? So you've got this amendment that's been adopted. Now you got a main motion that says we're going to change these colors, and this is where men will wear, and this is what females will wear. What motion is required? What vote is required to adopt this motion as amended? Is it a majority or 2/3? Question number 3. During your meeting, a report is presented that the executive board of the Fat is Beautiful Society has endorsed a clothesline that caters to extended women's sizes. Now you're upset because you have purchased clothes from this vendor and you were dissatisfied with the quality. You move to rescind this endorsement. It's a close vote with 25 voting in favor of rescinding and 20 voting against rescinding. What is the outcome of this vote? It receives majority vote. The endorsement by the executive board is rescinded. Or B, it received majority vote, but not 2/3. The motion is lost. Write down your answer. Is majority vote enough to adopt this motion to rescind? Or do you need 2/3 or majority of the entire membership? Write down your answer, A or B. Okay, just 2 more questions. Marjorie Alexander announced at the February meeting her intent to make a motion at the March meeting to move to rescind the previously adopted motion that all members of FIBS will be assessed $25 to purchase a gift for the outgoing president. At the March meeting, Marjorie appears reluctant to make her previously announced motion to rescind this action. Janice Jones is recognized, and she makes the motion to rescind. The chair rules that it is not in order for Janice to make this motion, since she is not the person who gave notice that the motion would be made. Now, is the chair correct? Answer A, only the person who gives notice can make the motion. Or is B, the chair is in error? Any member can make the previously announced motion. Write down your answer, A or B. Is the chair correct to rule that the motion is out of order because she's not the one who gave notice? Or is it B, the chair is in error and anyone can make the motion? And write down your answer. Last question. The awards committee was given the authority to select the hotel for the awards banquet. There are 10 people on the committee and all 10 members were present. At the April meeting, the person over the site selection announces that he's been informed that the menu prices at the Hilton have been increased by 30%. If they move the banquet to the Hyatt hotel, they won't have to increase ticket prices. He moves to amend the previously adopted motion by striking out the Hilton and inserting Hyatt. All 10 members of the committee are present. No previous notice has been given that the motion to amend something previously adopted would be made at the April meeting. So he did not give notice that he was going to make this motion. What vote is required to adopt the motion to amend? Is it A, majority, or B, 2/3? Write down your answer. He did not give previous notice that he was going to make this motion. And without previous notice, does it require majority or does it require 2/3? Now, those are the 5 pre-test questions. I know it says post-test, but that's because I changed it and forgot to change that to pre-test. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the presentation. As I'm sure many of you know, there are 5 classes of motions, and these are in no order of rank. First, we have the main motion. As I'm sure many of you know, the main motion is divided into original main and incidental main. Subsidiary motions, there's 7 of those, and they are ranked. Privilege motions, there are 5 of those, and they are also ranked. In fact, the privilege motions are the highest ranking motions. They sit atop the top of the heap. Incidental motions, there are 22 of those, and they are not ranked. And then the last class of motions, motions that bring a question again before the assembly. And there are 4 of those, and they're not ranked. So these are the 5 classes of motions. And for those of you who are studying for the IRP exam, you're going to need to know this. So if this is information, you're like, oh, this is interesting. No, it's got to be more than interesting. You're going to have to know what these 5 classes of motions are, as well as the ranking of those motions that are ranked. So there are 4 motions in this class, motions that bring a question again before the assembly. Motion to reconsider, which I think is the most complicated motion in Roberts. That's just my personal opinion. I think this is a very complicated motion. I wrestle with this motion, and I'm a PRP, and I've been doing this a long time. It's a complicated motion. Motion to take from the table. Something has been tabled, and now you need to take it from the table and deal with it. Motion to discharge a committee. You're unhappy with how they're functioning, and you want them out of the business. And then last but certainly not least, the 2 motions that are the subject of tonight's presentation, the motion to rescind and the motion to amend something previously adopted. Now, very important, sometimes there are things in parliamentary law that are not necessarily exciting, but they're really critical to your understanding of parliamentary procedure. And there are 3 principles of parliamentary law that inform this last class, motions that bring questions again. And it's really important that you understand this. And one of the reasons it's important is that this doesn't just inform the class. These are basic principles that you're going to use for all motions. So this is not just important for the motions I'm going to talk about tonight. This is important for you to understand for all motions. So the first principle is that during the meeting or series of connected meetings, like a session, in which the assembly has decided a question, the same or substantially the same question cannot be brought up again except through special procedures. So let's put this in plain English. At a meeting, if you have voted a motion up or down, you cannot bring that question back, or essentially that question back, except through special procedures. In other words, the minority that lost cannot browbeat the majority by continuing to raise an issue that the majority has already decided they either want or don't want. Very interesting. This is called the settled rule. Now, if you look in Roberts, the big Roberts, you won't find the term settled rule. The term settled rule is in Roberts in brief. The rule is in Roberts. It just doesn't call it the settled rule. In the in brief, it calls it the settled rule. So if you're at a meeting, even if you're not dealing with the two motions that we're talking about tonight, once the majority have voted a motion, either adopting it or voting against it, you can't continue bringing that up unless you're going to use special procedures to do so. Second principle, while a question is temporarily disposed of, but is not finally settled, no similar or conflicting motion whose adoption would restrict the assembly and acting on the first question can be introduced. So let's put this in plain English. Let's say you refer a matter to a committee. That means that that matter has been temporarily disposed of, but is not finally settled. So if you refer a matter to a committee, you cannot then adopt a similar or a conflicting motion that would restrict your organization from acting on the question you referred. Now, does that make sense to people? If, let's say there's a motion to purchase the building at 100 Main Street as your headquarters, and you refer that matter to a committee because purchasing buildings is complicated. You need inspections, and you may want to have estimates on repairs or renovations, get licensing information. You cannot then have a motion to purchase the building at 300 Maple Street because that restricts what you referred to a committee. So temporarily disposed of, you referred it to a committee, or maybe you've laid it on the table. So you've temporarily disposed of the motion, but it is not finally settled. You cannot have a similar or conflicting motion whose adoption would restrict the assembly on acting on the first question. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. Third principle, to change what the assembly has adopted requires something more than what was necessary to adopt it in the first place. So if you've adopted something and now you want to change it, what it's going to take to change it is more than what it took to adopt it. Now, those three principles are important for everything, not just these two motions we're presenting tonight. So if you're new to parliamentary procedure or you are studying for the RP, understanding these three principles is important for your understanding of parliamentary procedure. Now, let's get back to these two motions. The four motions in the class, bringing questions back, enable your organization without violating these three principles to do three things: reopen a completed question during the same session, take up one that has been temporarily disposed of, or change something previously adopted and still in force. So the motions to bring questions back before the assembly, in effect, allow you to do these three things without violating these three principles. And we'll talk about that. Any questions before I move on? We seem to have all levels of learners present tonight, and I don't want to leave someone behind who may be more novice as a learner, while the experienced people, I know you've caught on to it and you probably knew it already, but I just don't want to leave anyone behind. And please, no question is dumb. No question is stupid. This is a Sunday night at 7 o'clock. I'm sure there's something more you could be doing, like at the bar or watching baseball. So if you're going to spend your time with me, then you need to leave this meeting with a clear understanding of what they asked me to present. So please don't take the view, well, everybody understands it except me, so I don't want to raise my hand. I taught nursing for 30 years, and students would do that, would drive me crazy. So if there's something about any of this you don't understand, please, please, please unmute and ask your question. Okay. Now, the motions to rescind and amend something previously adopted, they have no rank. None of these motions rank, so one is not higher than the other. They are considered to be incidental main motions, and like all main motions, they have a low ranking. Now, the purpose of these motions is to either erase or delete something or to change something. If you make the motion to rescind, then what you want to do is cancel something that has been adopted. You'll say, look, we need to get rid of that. If what you want to do is to amend, then you don't want to get rid of it. You want to modify the wording and have a different version. So rescinding is like an eraser. You've gone to the blackboard and you've just erased something, gotten rid of it. To amend something previously adopted says, well, no, I don't want to get rid of dues. I just think that it's time for us to have an increase. I think we've had $100 dues for 20 years. We need to make it $150. So we're not getting rid of dues. We're just amending the amount and increasing it. Now, the motions to rescind and amend something previously adopted are incidental main motions because, like all main motions, they bring business before the assembly by their introduction. When voted upon, business ceases to be pending. If you adopt the motion to rescind something, that's over. That business ceases to be pending. They can only be applied to motions on which the vote was affirmative. And that makes sense. You can't rescind something that doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, you can't rescind it. And if it doesn't exist, you can't amend it. These motions have to be applied to things that are in force and active. They cannot be applied to things that are not in force, okay? In contrast to the above, the motion to reconsider under certain circumstances can be applied to a vote that was affirmative or negative. In other words, if you're in a meeting and a motion gets voted down, the only way to bring it back at that same meeting is the motion to reconsider. Because if it doesn't exist, you can't amend it. And if it doesn't exist, you can't rescind it. The problem is, or the difference is, not the problem, is that adopting the motion to reconsider does not change what you were doing. It just reopens that question. Whereas these two motions of rescind and amend, they change what you were doing if they're adopted. So whatever you were doing, it's going to be different, or whatever you're doing is not going to exist anymore. But the motion to reconsider just reopens the question. It does not change anything. Everybody clear on that? Now, there are two forms of one incidental main motion, and both motions are governed by the identical rules, which is why they're normally presented together. The rules are identical for amend and rescind. The motion to rescind is also known as the motion to repeal or annul, because if adopted, it cancels or countermands a previous action. And what you're doing when you rescind something is you're striking out an entire main motion or resolution or order or rule that has previously been adopted. Let me give you a quick example. I'm Methodist. I'm AME Zion to be exact. and I'm the parliamentarian for the National AME Zion Church. The National AME Zion Church meets every 4 years in what is called the General Conference. And this is the AME Zion Church worldwide. India, Africa, United Kingdom, United States, the Caribbean, all of the AME Zion Church worldwide. And there is a provision in our rules that has been enforced since the 1700s when we were formed. And that provision is that a bishop is the husband of one wife. And if there are any other Methodist people who are on this should sound very familiar to you. Now, they're not talking about bigamy, which is why it can be confusing. They're saying that if you are married and you divorce and you marry somebody else, in the eyes of the church, you have two wives. Okay? In the eyes of, now you've divorced this person. You've divorced wife A. But in the eyes of the church, if you remarry, you've got two wives. And if you want to be a bishop in the AME Zion Church, you can only have one wife, one living wife. Now, if she dies, that's different. But if you marry someone, divorce her, she's still alive, and you marry somebody else, you cannot run for bishop in our church. As you can imagine, this provision has created a lot of problems. And as a lifelong Methodist, I'm not sure it's a good provision, because I think it means that sometimes when a man wants to be bishop, he stays with a woman that he really is not truly married to, so that he can run for bishop. Anyway, at one of the general conferences, this provision was rescinded. And it created a humongous controversy. Humongous. So the motion to reconsider was made. And I advised the bishop who was presiding, because all 12 bishops take turn presiding. I said, the person who's making the motion to reconsider has to state that they voted in favor of the motion. It's the one motion, reconsider, where you have to reveal how you voted, because only someone who voted on the prevailing side can make the motion to reconsider. So the young man, minister, said, I voted in favor of the motion. Another minister said, you lying. You didn't vote in favor of it. He said, but I did, so I'll make the motion to reconsider. They adjourned the conference without bringing the motion to reconsider up. It was not in order for it to be brought up at that time. And they adjourned the conference. And the senior bishop called me. He said, well, where are we with this? I said, the last action taken on that motion was to rescind the rule. He said, what? The last action taken was to rescind the rule. So at the next general conference, people who've been married 4 and 5 times were eligible to run for bishop. Now they've reinstated the rule, but for that next general conference, didn't matter how many living wives you had, you could run for bishop. But my point is, the motion to reconsider does not change what you voted. It reopens the question. Whereas the motion to rescind and amend changes what you did. Does everybody, I feel like I sort of went around Robin Hood's barn to sort of explain that, but I think it's an example you won't forget that the motion to reconsider only reopens the question. That's all it does. It does not change anything. Now, neither motion is an interrupting motion. You cannot interrupt to make these motions. They can only be moved when no other motion is pending. However, and this is really, really important, if you want to give notice of your intent to make these motions, you're just giving notice that at the next meeting, you're going to make one of these motions. You can give notice while another question is pending, as long as it does not interrupt someone who's speaking. Let me say that again. Making the motion cannot be made when someone else has the floor. So you cannot say, I move to rescind, I'm into. You can't do that. But if what you're doing is giving notice of your intent to make this motion at the next meeting, you can in fact give notice as long as someone is not interrupted, even while someone else has been given the floor. If they have not begun to speak, you can give notice that at the next meeting, you're going to make the motion to rescind or amend. So giving notice can be made when another person has been given the floor but has not begun to speak. But making the actual motion can't do it. Does everyone understand that fine distinction? Yes, Tom. You need to unmute.
So why would somebody is there an advantage to giving notice whereas not to give notice?
Yes, if you give notice of the intent to make these motions, you only need majority vote to adopt them. If you don't give notice, you need 2/3 the majority of the membership. So giving notice, and I'm going to talk about that. Giving notice means you have a lower standard to get them adopted than if you don't give notice. Yes, Penelope.
And that's all three of these? The reconsider, the rescind,
Not for reconsider.
not the reconsider.
No,
And-
but for rescind and amend something previously adopted, that's true.
And can you make a motion to rescind an amendment to a motion that had been previously passed, or only the whole motion?
No. Well, that violates the settled rule. So if the amendment has been adopted, and the amendment then would change the main motion. If the main motion is not adopted, then it's not enforced. So the main motion would have to be adopted in order for that to be enforced.
But if it was, and
Then you can move to rescind or amend. But if you do it at the same meeting, it requires 2/3. If you did not give previous notice, it requires 2/3. You're looking perplexed. Let me help you. What's the problem?
no, I'm trying to embed it here because, but I think as we go further, it will become clearer.
Okay. If it doesn't, we can circle back around.
Okay.
These motions yield to the subsidiary motions, privilege motions, and incidental motions. They can be applied to anything as long as it has continuing force and effect, and it was made as a result of the adoption of one or more main motions. And all of the subsidiary motions can be applied to them. So if you make the motion to amend something previously adopted, you can make a motion to amend that motion. Okay? You can make a motion to refer it to committee. All of the subsidiary motions can be applied to them. They must be seconded. They are debatable. And debate can go into the merits of a question with which it proposes to amend or rescind. And the reason this is important is that the subsidiary motions, the 7 subsidiary motions, only one of those motions, and that's the motion to postpone indefinitely, allows you to debate the merits of the main question. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say on this motion to purchase the property at 100 Main Street, there's a motion to refer this to committee. So that you got the main motion, purchase the property at 100 Main Street. There's a motion to refer it to committee, which is a subsidiary motion. If you want to, when debate is open on the motion to refer, you can only speak to whether or not it should be referred. You cannot speak to the merits of purchasing the property. So when you have a subsidiary motion, only one of the 7 subsidiary motions allows you to debate the main motion. And that's the motion to postpone indefinitely. The other subsidiary motions, if they are debatable, only allow you to debate the merits of the subsidiary motion. These motions, you can go into the merits of the question which it proposes to amend or rescind. Both motions can be amended, but if amendments are made and are adopted that exceeds the scope of notice, then the previous notice is nullified and the motion can no longer be adopted by majority vote. So let me make sure you understand that. Getting back to Tom's point, Tom said, well, what's the value of giving previous notice? If you give previous notice at the previous meeting that you're going to make one of these motions, at the meeting where you actually make the motions, you now only need majority vote to adopt it. That's all you need. If you make these motions without previous notice, you need 2/3. However, even if you give previous notice, the next month at the meeting where you actually make the motion, if an amendment is adopted that exceeds the scope of notice, you've now lost your previous notice and you now need 2/3 instead of majority. Does everybody understand that? Penelope.
That seems clear, but it brings up another question to me. If they did not give previous notice and an amendment is proposed, does that amendment also require 2/3?
No, the amendment does not require 2/3. The amendment only requires majority, but adoption of the motion as amended will require 2/3. So let me say it one last time. I don't want to browbeat it, but I don't want to leave anybody behind. The main purpose of giving, in fact, the only real purpose of giving previous notice that you're going to make either of these motions is to reduce the vote necessary to adopt them from 2/3 to majority. That's the whole purpose. You're saying to your organization, look, I'm telling you now that next month I'm going to make this motion to change what we just voted. And if you don't like what I'm saying, then you need to make sure you're at the meeting to vote against it. Because by me giving previous notice, I'm only going to need majority vote to adopt this. Now, at the next month's meeting, you make your motion, but an amendment is offered that exceeds what was in your motion. It's in order, but it exceeds what you said you were going to do. If that amendment is adopted, previous notice is now destroyed. And now that motion for which you gave previous notice as amended now requires 2/3 to adopt. You have lost your previous notice because an amendment was adopted that exceeded the notice that you gave. Is that clear to everybody?
Hey, Dr. Francis, I was just going to add, it's clear. I think it's just going to take some time to really digest it. I haven't heard it quite like this, but it makes sense. But, so you said giving notice, what two motions is that again? That's on rescind and
amend something previously adopted.
Rescind and amend something previously adopted. Okay, great.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so going back to Tom's point, he said, well, okay, what do you get for giving previous notice? You get a lower vote requirement. When you give previous notice, you only need a majority vote to adopt what it is you want to amend or rescind. But when you make those motions at the next meeting, and you make the motion just as you gave notice, but someone else proposes an amendment to your motion, and that amendment is adopted, and that amendment exceeds what you said, now your motion is changed because it's been amended. You've now lost previous notice, and now you need 2/3 to adopt this amended motion for which no notice was given. Tom, you had your hand up first.
Sure. So just to be clear, do you use the words, I am giving previous notice that I'd like to debate this and state the topic right then and there? And then
you have to say what motion you're going to make.
so you have to state the motion and that you use the term previous notice, and then I guess that's entered on the minutes so that people know that it's coming up for the next meeting.
That's right. So you say this is previous notice that at the next meeting, I'm going to move to rescind the motion just adopted by striking out $100 and inserting 50.
Okay.
So you got to state what motion you're going to. You can't just say I'm giving previous notice that I'm going to amend. I'm going to move to amend. You got to say what you are doing. What is your motion going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Penelope.
Right, thank you.
So by previous notice, is that only at a previous meeting, or can can notice be given when the secretary sends out the notice of a meeting?
Both,
Can you-
and I'm gonna talk about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's fine. But you've given notice by stating what motion you're going to make at the next meeting. So at the February meeting, you get up at the February meeting and say, this is notice that at the March meeting, I'm gonna move to amend the motion just adopted by striking out $100 and inserting 50. That's the motion you're gonna make. And that's the motion that you give notice. At the March meeting, if someone moves to amend your motion to strike out, your motion is to strike out 100 and insert 50. Someone moves to amend by striking out your 50 and inserting 75. That exceeds the notice you gave. You said you want to strike out 100 and insert 50. Someone proposes an amendment to your motion to strike out 50 and insert 75. That exceeds the notice you gave. And if that amendment to your motion is adopted, so that now your motion says to strike out 100 and insert 75, you've lost previous notice and it now requires 2/3 to be adopted. Okay. Now, if previous notice is required, like it is to amend bylaws or special rules of order, then you cannot exceed scope of notice. You can't do it. So if you are doing previous notice, as I'm sure you would for bylaws, I'm sure your bylaws require that bylaw amendments must be presented 30 days before they're voted upon. 30 days notice for bylaw amendments. That's a requirement for previous notice. You cannot exceed scope of notice for bylaws. You can't do it. You can go less than what you proposed, but you can't do more. So let's go back to the example and say that your dues are in the bylaws. Let's say your dues say that your bylaws say that the dues for this organization are $100 a year. And there's a proposed bylaw amendment to increase that to $150, to increase it by $50. Because the bylaws require previous notice, you cannot have an amendment to that bylaw proposal that would be 1 cent more than $50. Can't be $50.01. Neither can it be less than $50. You can't go less than 100. That exceeds scope of notice. So if what you're doing is an action where previous notice is required, you cannot exceed scope of notice. And sometimes what is exceeding scope of notice is kind of difficult to determine. Sometimes it's a gray kind of area. Now, as I said, these motions are intended to be made with previous notice. If they're made without previous notice, it requires 2/3. Majority vote if notice has been given. And as I said to Penelope, either you do it at the previous meeting, or it can be given when you give notice of the meeting. So when notice of the meeting goes out, the notice could include a statement that Penelope or Tan Johnson has announced that at the March meeting, she intends to make a motion to amend the motion adopted at the February meeting by striking out 100 and inserting 50. So you have to say what the motion is. So notice happens in 2 ways. Either you stand up at the previous meeting and announce that you're going to make this motion, or when the notice goes out to the membership of the next meeting, you include the notice in the meeting, or you could do both. You could have someone stand up and announce it and include it in the notice to the meeting. Now, let's talk about, yes, Eva. You're on mute, Eva.
Yes, thank you. For the previous notice, how much in advance do you have to have the previous notice? If the meeting is 1 week prior, but the written notice goes out, how soon prior to the next meeting?
That's very interesting. I'm glad you asked that question. Roberts doesn't say. All he says is a reasonable amount of time. So the organization would have to decide what is a reasonable amount of time. That's something that you would have to decide as an organization. And so Roberts does not give a number of days or weeks to determine and define what is reasonable. Every organization would need to define that themselves. Barbara.
Thank you.
So when you're giving previous notice, does it have to be the exact wording, or can it be, I think your wording was
No, it has to be the exact wording. People have
exact
to know what
wording.
they're voting
Okay.
on.
Okay.
People have to know exactly what the notice is. I move
Okay.
to strike out black and white and insert royal blue and gold. If adopted,
Okay.
the rule will read that the colors of the Fattest Beautiful Society are royal blue and gold.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about executive board. So your executive board has met and they have adopted several motions. When they meet with the assembly, when the assembly next meets, your organization meets, the secretary or the president, more likely the secretary, should report all substantive motions adopted by your executive board. Substantive. The organization has the right to rescind or amend any action by the board if it's not too late. Now, your secretary should not be reading the minutes of the executive board. She just reports those substantive actions adopted by the board. After the secretary makes this report, the president then says, are there any questions? And this is the opportunity for the members to say, you did what? You have lost your raggedy mind. I know y'all didn't just vote a cruise for the outgoing president. You guys are crazy. I move to rescind the action by the executive board and voting out a cruise for the outgoing president. The organization has the right to rescind or amend any action taken by the executive board if it's not too late. Now, if you move to rescind or amend something by the executive board and you did not give previous notice, it requires the same vote for anybody else who wants to do these two motions, 2/3 or majority of the entire membership. So if your executive committee, executive board, if you have an executive board, when they meet, the secretary should be reporting what substantive motions were adopted by your executive board. The president then says, are there any questions about any actions of the executive board? Which then gives the members the opportunity to say, I disagree with the action. I move to rescind or amend, whatever it is. And because if that motion is made without previous notice, it requires 2/3. Now, let's say you know what they've done and you do give previous notice, then it's majority. But if it's done without previous notice, it has the same requirements that a member would have if they wanted to change something previously adopted. So that's your executive committee. Now, in committees, things are a little different. So, vote required for these motions to be adopted in committees. Yes, Penelope.
I just wondered, can that motion be brought by a member of the executive board who maybe had disagreed with what the vote was?
Sure. Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter whether they voted for or against in the
It
committee?
does not.
Okay.
It does not. I can't tell you how many times I've been called by somebody who was distraught that a committee voted to do something and one of the committee members debated against it. And isn't that wrong? No, it is not wrong. If you're a member and you have the right to debate, you have the right to say, I disagree. And maybe you don't want to do a minority report. I've done this. I'm in an organization where I'm chair of a national recommendations committee, and the committee voted to do something that I thought was stupid. And when we got to convention, the person at the mic arguing against what the committee voted to do was the chair of the committee. It was me. I said, this is crazy. I don't know what was wrong with these people. This is insane. I urged the convention to not support this, and they didn't. And I was chair of that committee. So yeah, if you're on the executive board and you didn't vote for the president to have a cruise, you have every right to go to the mic and say, I don't know what they were smoking. Maybe there was, marijuana in the brownies. I'm not sure what happened, but all of a sudden we were voting $5,000 out for the president and his wife to go on a cruise. And I knew that y'all would have a fit. This is stupid. Yeah, Eva.
Yes, sorry, I'm asking about the timeline again. Because of the previous notice. So if the committee meets on the Monday and the regular meeting is on the Wednesday, does the committee give the report prior to the meeting so somebody can give previous notice if they object to something? Or because if that report is read on the Wednesday meeting, then no one can give a previous notice because they haven't had that information. So how does that work?
Are we talking about executive boards or are we talking about committees? Because committees are different.
Okay, what were we talking about before? Was that a committee or a board?
It was a board.
The board, yes, the board. Okay, yes, that was.
So let's say
board.
your executive board, let's say you meet on Sunday and your
Okay.
executive board meets on Wednesday. My guess is that you would not have time for previous notice for the Sunday meeting. But you could, at the Sunday meeting in May, give notice that you want to rescind that for June, if that would not be too late. You could do that.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Anna, you had your hand up and you took it down. Did you not have your question, or was it
It
answered
was
already?
exactly the same question as Eva just said.
Okay, all right. So committees are different, and I want to make sure you understand that because this can be even more confusing. So what does it take for these motions to be adopted in committee? They require 2/3, unless all committee members who voted for the motion that is now being moved to be rescinded or amended are present or have received reasonable notice that the motions to amend or rescind will be made. Let me repeat that. The motion, if you're in a committee and the committee has voted to do something and you're against that, you too can make the motion to rescind or amend. If everybody who voted for the motion, whether they voted aye or nay, aye or no, if everyone is present or has received notice that you're going to make these motions, then you only need majority vote to rescind or amend something in a committee. In a committee. So if the entire committee that voted is present, or they received notice that you're going to be voting on this, you only need majority vote, even though notice was not given. So if all the committee members who voted for the motion are present, even without giving previous notice, you only need majority vote. Or if they were told, there's gonna be a motion to amend or rescind this, reasonable notice, then you only need majority vote. So committees operate a little differently than your regular organization. But everybody who voted for the motion has to be present. Okay. Yes, Barbara.
Okay, so going back to the board example, I know a lot of organizations now require their officers, which would be their executive board mostly, to sign rules of conduct or something similar to that, that they must agree with the decision of the board.
Well,
So
I don't know why anybody would have, number one, I don't know why any organization would want that. Why would you want that?
That they would support the action of the board.
Well, that's the organization's right to do that, but I think that's a terrible rule.
Okay, okay,
I think it's a terrible rule because what you're basically saying is I've been silenced and I've lost my rights as a member. I'm still a member of the organization. And what you're saying to me is if you serve on the board and the board does something that you think is really bad, you have no right to speak against it.
okay.
Why would you want that voice silenced? Why would you not want to hear what they have to say, even if you disagree?
Okay,
I
good
think
to
it's a
know.
terrible rule. And
I've seen it. And
I wouldn't serve on a board that tied me like that. I'd say, you know what? I'm not going to be silent, so I'm not going to be on the board because Frances is going to give her opinion. I pay my dues and I have a right to voice my opinion. And I'm not going to put myself in a position where you can tell me I cannot say what I want to say. Not going to happen.
Okay, I've seen it several times. I was just curious.
Well,
Okay,
I think it's a terrible rule. It takes away their rights as members to freely express themselves.
I see your point.
mean,
Yes.
Yeah, this might not be the best example, and if I offend anyone, I certainly apologize. I'm not trying to be offensive. I've never had this at my church, but I know of churches where the pastor demands that if you're going to be an officer on a leadership position, you have to attend Bible study and prayer meeting. You have to do that. Now, I worked midnights for years, particularly when my children were small. So while the pastor is asleep, Francis is awake, walking the hallways and taking care of the sick and the ill. I'm not coming to Bible study at 8 o'clock at night. I'm in the bed sleep. So when you ask me if I would take on a position, I say no. And you say, well, why not? I said, because you're telling me that my free will to attend these activities has been replaced by your demand that if I'm going to do something, I got to do it your way. You're sleeping at night. I'm up. I'm a nurse. I can't be sleeping on my job and make mistakes that could affect somebody's life. Can't do it. So when I was asked, well, will you do so-and-so? The answer is no. And this is why. You're taking away that person's rights to freely express themselves. I wouldn't do it. And I would fight to the death in an organization that wanted to enact that. I think that's crazy. Barbara, do you have another question?
Related to that. So if you agree to be the parliamentarian for the organization and you are a member of the organization, that's a little different, I guess.
It is different into this regard. As a parliamentarian, you are limited in your ability to speak anyway.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and to vote. I mean, the president can vacate the chair and speak and debate. There is no chair for you to vacate. You're stuck.
Okay.
Okay. And
Got it.
and so you have to make the decision. Do I want to be parliamentarian for an organization that wants to take the rights away? And look, I know what Robert says about the role of the parliamentarian, believe me. Unfortunately, and maybe the other parliamentarians are experiencing this as well, more and more, the longer I serve as parliamentarian, the more I see the parliamentarian becoming the last line of defense for officers who are crazy. And if the parliamentarian doesn't speak up, nobody speaks up. Now, I know Robert says this is not our role. And look, I was on the Commission on Credentialing with Thomas Balch, one of the authorship team of Robert's Rules of Order. Magnificent human being. I mean, Thomas Balch is truly a gentleman. He's just an amazing person. And his position was that if you're parliamentarian for people who are crazy, you need to not be parliamentarian. And I appreciate and I respect that. Maybe you're not seeing it with the organizations you deal with, but with the organizations I sometimes deal with, more and more the parliamentarian is the last line of defense. The only person who's saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I find myself speaking up, knowing I'm not supposed to, because I'm seeing national boards doing things that are wrong. Let me say this last example before I leave this and move on. If I'm on a national board or any board and I have fiduciary responsibility, I'm speaking up. I don't care what Robert says. Because if we get sued, my defense, and I was parliamentarian, and Robert says that I shouldn't be talking because I need to be neutral. The lawsuit isn't going to care nothing about that. Okay, let me get back to the presentation. I've done my soapbox for tonight. So just for your edification, I want to compare the motion to reconsider versus the motions to rescind and amend something previously adopted. The motion to reconsider can only be made by someone who voted on the prevailing side. If the ayes prevailed, you had to have voted aye. If the noes prevailed, you had to have voted no. And as I said before, this is the one motion where you have to reveal how you voted. When you make this motion, you have to say, having voted on the prevailing side, I move. The motions to rescind and amend, anybody can make these motions, no matter how they voted or if they didn't vote at all. Think about it. Some of the provisions you have are 10, 15, 20 years old. Nobody knows who voted for them 20 years ago. You might not have even been in the organization. So the motions to rescind and amend can be made by anybody. The motion to reconsider is in order only on the same day or the next calendar day as the motion you want reconsidered was disposed of. So the motion to reconsider has a very limited shelf life. If you're meeting on a Sunday night, the motion to reconsider is only in order on Sunday night. You can't do it at the next meeting. You can only do it tonight. Whereas the motions to rescind and amend have no time limit on when these motions can be made. You can make them at any time. As I said to you before, adopting the motion to reconsider does not change the original motion. It merely reopens that motion for debate and voting. If you adopt a motion to rescind or amend, it does change the original motion. Now you've taken out 100 and inserted 150. It changes it. All it does with the motion to reconsider is reopen that question. When notice has been given for the motions to rescind and amend, you generally wait for the member who gave notice to make one of these motions. But if the person who gave notice does not make it, anybody can make that motion for which notice was given. Let me repeat that. Let's say Anna makes the motion and says at the May meeting, this is notice that at the June meeting, I'm going to make the motion to amend the motion just adopted by striking out 200 and inserting 150. At the June meeting, Anna is strangely quiet. Penelope says, well, I'm going to make that motion. So Penelope says, I move the previously noticed motion to amend the motion adopted to strike out 200 and insert 150. Once notice has been given, anybody can make that motion, not just the person who gave notice. The motion to reconsider can be applied under certain circumstances to motions that were adopted and motions that failed. Whereas the motions to amend and rescind can only be applied to motions that have been adopted and are in continuing force. You cannot amend something that doesn't exist. You can't rescind something that doesn't exist. You can only amend something that is currently being applied. Now, there are certain circumstances under which these motions are not in order. If the motion to reconsider has been made, but not called up, you cannot make these motions if what you want to do can be achieved by calling up the motion to reconsider. So the motion to reconsider has been made. It has not been called up. You want to hurry up the process. But if what you want to do can be achieved by calling up the motion to reconsider, you can't do these motions. You can't double dip. If the result of the adopted main motion has been executed and it is impossible to undo, then these motions are intrinsically irrelevant. If it's been done, you can't rescind it or amend it. Now, if there's part of that motion that has not been executed, then that can be rescinded or amended if it makes sense. But if the executive board has done, let's say that the national president of Toastmasters is in town, is in Albuquerque, and the executive board decides to take him out to dinner or her out to dinner. And they take them to the most expensive restaurant in Albuquerque. And they spend $700 wining and dining, champagne, lobster tail and crab legs and steak, flaming desserts at the table, after dinner drinks and pre-dinner cocktails. And they spend $750. And they bring the bill to the next meeting of your organization. And Barbara Posler looks like a person who doesn't tolerate any kind of crap. She just has that look. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know her, but she, to me, just looking at her face, looks like a woman who would get up and say, you have all lost your funky minds. $750? Well, I moved to rescind. It's too late. They've eaten the lobster tail and the steak. They've had the champagne. They've had the pre-dinner drinks and the after-dinner cocktails. You can't undo that. Now you can fire everybody. You're crazy. We're rescinding the election of everybody. But there's no point in trying to make a motion to rescind or amend that. Now you could make a motion that the executive board go in their pockets and give y'all back $500. You could do that, but you can't rescind it or amend it. You just can't. If a resignation has been acted upon, or a person has been elected to or expelled from membership or office, and they were present and they were officially notified of the action, you cannot amend or rescind that. You cannot do that. If it's an expulsion, then the bylaw should delineate how people get reinstated. And if they don't, then you need to vote on how you're going to reinstate someone who's been expelled. And then afterwards you learn, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea. The bylaw should also prescribe the steps for removing an officer from office. And if not, you can follow what Robert says in chapter 16 about how to remove an officer. But there are certain circumstances under which these motions cannot be used. Now, the motion is made when a person wants rescind and expunge from the minutes. I've only seen this done one time, and I've been a member of NAP since 1997. This is really considered extreme. It is considered very, very extreme. This is considered something that you only do under really rare circumstances. Rescind and expunge from the minutes. This is when you want the organization to express strong disapproval of an action. And Robert says, look, this requires a majority vote of the entire membership, whether present or not. And they said you might even need stronger support than just majority may be advisable to do this. If the motion to rescind and expunge from the minutes is adopted, the secretary, in the presence of the assembly, draws a single line through or around the words to be expunged and writes across them the words rescinded and ordered expunged. And then she puts down the date and her signature. Now, you cannot blot out the words that are being expunged, because if you do that, then you can't verify whether the words were expunged. So you either draw a line through so you can still read the words, or you circle them. However, if the minutes are published, anything that was ordered expunged is omitted. So if you publish your minutes or proceedings, you would not include anything that was moved to be expunged from the minutes. Now, Robert says, look, we think this is really extreme. What we think is better is just to rescind the previous action and then maybe adopting a resolution condemning the action which has been rescinded. They think that that might be a better option than doing this. And as I said to you, I've been a parliamentarian a long time. I've only seen this used one time. I've only seen it used once. It's considered extreme. Okay, now we're gonna go back. Any questions about anything that I covered? Any questions about anything that I covered? Any questions? Because as we do the post test, I'll be finished. Anything you don't understand, anything you want clarity on, anything you're like, gee whiz, Anna? Yes.
So I still try to understand in what situations would you like to reconsider instead of like, the other scenarios?
You're talking about expunge from the minutes?
No, before, sorry, like, before when we were discussing the differences between reconsider, rescind, or amend, like, what are the particular situations when you would rather make a motion to reconsider within
Okay.
the allotted time?
Very good question. The motion to reconsider, one of the major issues of the motion to reconsider is that it can be applied in some cases to motions that have been lost. So if a motion is defeated, the only way to bring it back at the same meeting is the motion to reconsider. There's no other way to bring it back because you cannot amend or rescind something that has not been adopted. Okay? Now, the other thing is that the motion to reconsider does not require previous notice. So if you get the motion to reconsider adopted, it only requires majority vote. Whereas both the motions to rescind and amend without notice require 2/3. So there's circumstances under which you might say, okay, I want to reconsider a motion because that reopens the question, and I only need majority vote to adopt the motion to reconsider. Whereas if I don't have previous notice, I need 2/3 for the motion to amend and rescind. Yes. SAAAJ.
Yes, the question, when you mentioned that if the motion to reconsider has been made but not yet called up, you cannot make these motions if the question can be reached. Can you give an example of that? I'm kind of confused.
Okay, let's say that the motion to reconsider is made and is made at a time when it is not in order to take it up. There's a pending matter because the motion to reconsider is not an interrupting motion. So you are working on an impending matter, and the motion to reconsider is made, but you can't take it up at that time. Okay, you're gonna have to take it up at a later time. Okay, because it's not an interrupting motion. Okay, now someone says, like Anna just mentioned, well, maybe instead of making the motion to reconsider, maybe I should move to amend or rescind. But if what you want to do can be taken up by calling up the motion to reconsider, you can't get around that by making the motion to amend or rescind. Because if the motion to reconsider has been adopted, if that motion to reconsider has been adopted, but it was just not taken up, you can't do an end around by saying, gee whiz, I think I want to do the motion to amend. If what you want to do can be achieved by calling up the motion to reconsider, you call up the motion to reconsider. That's what that means. You cannot do an end around on the motion to reconsider by then trying to switch to one of the motions to amend. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Penelope?
But then that would only be at the same meeting,
Yes.
the motion to reconsider. So you're acting quickly and without interrupting, you get the floor and you make a motion to reconsider. Now, when you say if it's not called up at that meeting, so the chair says that we'll have to lay it on the table, or the chair says just ignores you, or how would it not be called up if you have the floor to make the motion?
Well, in the example that I gave you earlier about what happened at my church, they adjourned the meeting and never called it up.
Okay.
They
So
adjourned the meeting because they thought erroneously that the making of the motion to reconsider got rid of the provision that it kept the provision that the bishop is the husband of one wife. And I had to give them the bad news that the motion to reconsider only reopens the question. It doesn't change anything. And that the last action taken on that provision was to get rid of it, was to delete it. They thought that adopting the motion to reconsider meant that that motion was no longer in force, and that wasn't true.
So they had to
Oh.
call up a privileged motion in order to defeat your motion. I mean,
I'm sorry, Penelope, say that again?
so they had to use a higher ranking motion, the motion to adjourn, to not consider the motion that was on the table to reconsider.
Right.
Is that what
Yes.
I'm hearing? And then, but once they've made a motion to adjourn, in order to give previous, now you're in the position that you really want to give previous notice, that would have to be done by telling the secretary to include the previous notice.
Not in this case, because this was a convention that meets every 4 years. Anything you don't do,
okay.
anything you don't do at adjournment is gone. It falls to the floor.
Okay.
It's gone.
Right.
Okay. But see, they thought because they didn't understand what the motion to reconsider meant, they were doing what they thought was an end around because they did not want the provision to be deleted that said the bishop was the husband of one wife. They didn't want that provision deleted. Of course, they're already bishops. Okay. So candidates for bishops is what this affected. But they didn't realize that all the motion to reconsider does is reopen the question. Doesn't change anything. Okay? So now let's go back to the, so let's go back to the pretest questions. You're a member of the Fat is Beautiful Society. The organization has adopted a motion presented by the Attire Committee that the official colors will be black and white. You voted against this motion. The next item of business is the awards banquet. Shirley Wilson has been recognized, but before she can speak, you rise and address the chair. And you tell the chair, this is notice that at the next meeting, I'm going to move to amend the previously adopted motion to strike out black and white and insert royal blue and gold. Which response by the president is correct? Does she tell the secretary to note in the minutes that Frances Jackson has given notice that she plans to make a motion to amend? Or does the chair say to her, the motion to amend something previously adopted is not an interrupting motion. Your motion to give notice is not in order at this time. Which answer is right, A or B? The answer is A. While the motion to amend something previously adopted is not an interrupting motion, notice to make the motion can be made even after someone else has been given the floor but not begun to speak. So while you cannot interrupt someone when you want to actually make the motion, if what you want to do is give notice that you're going to make the motion, you can in fact make give notice that you're going to make the motion when someone else has been given the floor but not yet begun to speak. And you can see the reference down there for A, 35, section 35, paragraph 2, subsection 1, and 35, section 35, paragraph 2, subsection 3. So you can look that up for yourself. Yes, Penelope.
And even though this motion had just been adopted, because you voted against it, you cannot make a motion to reconsider.
That's right.
Okay.
If I voted against it, I can't make the motion to reconsider.
Okay.
I would have to get somebody who voted for it to make the motion to reconsider, but I can't make the motion to reconsider because you have to have voted on the prevailing side to make the motion to reconsider. And I did not vote on the prevailing side. So again, it's a very slim difference, but it's a huge difference providing notice that you're going to make the motion can in fact be made when someone else has been given the floor but not begun to speak. But if you want to make the actual motion, that you cannot do. You cannot interrupt someone to make that motion, but you can give notice that you're going to make the motion, even when someone else has been given the floor, as long as they have not started speaking. Okay. Per the previous notice given at last month's meeting, I move to amend the previously adopted motion on the society's colors by striking out black and white and inserting royal blue and gold. If the motion is adopted, the motion will read that the color for the fattest beautiful society will be royal blue and gold. And your motion to amend is seconded. The chair states the motion. It is moved and seconded to amend the previously adopted motion by striking out black and white and inserting royal blue and gold. If adopted, the motion will read that the color of fibs will be royal blue and gold. Are you ready for the question? The chair recognizes Mary Jones. Mary Jones said, I move to amend the motion by adding, female members will wear royal blue dresses with gold stars, while male members will wear royal blue ties and gold dress shirts. Now, the answer is already there, but if the amendment is adopted, what vote is required to adopt the main motion? It's 2/3. Now, why is it 2/3? It's 2/3 because the amendment that was adopted exceeds the scope of notice. The notice was, we're just changing the colors. And if that was all that was being voted on, you would only need majority vote to adopt that motion. So if the motion that was being voted on stayed the same as the motion for which notice was given, you wouldn't need to do anything more than majority vote. But Mary Jones made an amendment, and her amendment was adopted. So now the main motion as amended is not just to change the colors, but to dictate that females will wear royal blue dresses with gold scars and that men will wear royal blue ties and gold dress shirts. This substantially changes the motion for which notice was given. So now previous notice is destroyed, and now you need 2/3 because what you're voting on now exceeds scope of notice. And you can no longer adopt this motion as amended by majority vote. Does everybody understand that? Is that clear to you? Okay. So if someone makes an amendment, and if that amendment is adopted, now if the amendment is not adopted, you're right back where you were. But if the amendment is adopted and that amendment exceeds scope of notice is destroyed. And now instead of majority vote, you now need 2/3 vote to adopt this motion as amended. Okay. Oh, why are the answers coming up? During your meeting, a report is presented that the executive board of FIBS has endorsed a clothesline that caters to extended women's sizes. You are upset because you have purchased clothes from this vendor and you were dissatisfied with the quality. You move to rescind this endorsement by the executive board. It's a close vote with 25 voting in favor of rescinding and 20 voting against. What is the outcome of this vote? It received a majority vote, the endorsement by the executive board is rescinded, or it received majority vote but not 2/3, the motion is lost. Is it A or B? The answer is B. No notice was given of your motion to rescind. And without any notice, it requires the same 2/3 that any other motion to rescind would require. Even though it's something you want to rescind that the executive board did, it doesn't matter. The fact that you want to rescind something and did not provide notice requires 2/3 or a majority of the membership. Marjorie Alexander announced at the February meeting her intent to make a motion at the March meeting to rescind the previously adopted motion that all members of FIBS will be assessed $25 to purchase a gift for the outgoing president. At the March meeting, Marjorie Alexander appears reluctant to make her previously announced motion to rescind the action taken at the February meeting. Janice Jones is recognized, and she makes the motion to rescind. The chair rules that it is not in order for Janice to make this motion, since she is not the person who gave notice that the motion would be made. A, is the chair correct? Only the person who gives notice can make the motion? Or is the chair is error? Any member can make the previously announced motion. Which is it, A or B?
Is it B?
It's B.
Mhm.
Once notice has been given that a motion will be made, anybody can make the motion, not just the person who gave notice. Not just the person who gave notice. So if Marjorie gets cold feet, Penelope can make the motion, even though she's not the one who gave notice. Tom?
What happened if nobody gives notice, then it just drops and it's
Yeah,
forever
because no
gone?
motion has been made. You've given notice that you're gonna make it, but you still gotta make the motion, and it has to be seconded.
Okay, so then
Giving
it's
notice that
done
you're
deal.
gonna make the motion is not making the motion.
Mhm.
You still have to make the motion, and it must be seconded in order for it to be before the organization, just like any other motion.
And then it can't be done at the next meeting because then it's too late. It has to be done at they have to state what meeting they want to do it. And if they don't do it, then it has to be, notice has to be given again.
Right. And there's a
Okay.
quarterly interval restriction on this. In other words, let's say you don't meet every month.
Mhm.
You cannot give notice beyond a quarterly interval. So if you meet 3 times a year and you meet beyond a quarterly interval, you can't give notice for something that's beyond a quarterly interval. Not at that meeting. You can give notice when the notice goes out for the next meeting, but you can't say in January, this is notice that at the June meeting, I'm going to move to rescind something, because that's beyond a quarterly interval. What you would have to do is when the notice goes out for the June meeting, have that notice state that you intend to make a motion to rescind something.
And if you have to miss the meeting, somebody else can do it on your behalf then.
That's right. Because anybody can make the motion once notice has been given, it's going to be made.
All right, thank you.
Okay. The awards committee, last question, was given the authority to select the hotel for the awards banquet. There are 10 people on the committee, and all 10 committee members were present at the March meeting where the motion was adopted 8-2 to hold the banquet at the Hilton. At the April meeting, the person over the site selection announces that he's been informed that the menu prices at the Hilton have been increased by 30%. If they move the banquet to the Hyatt, they won't have to increase ticket prices and keep basically the same menu. He moves to amend the previously adopted motion by striking out the Hilton Hotel and inserting the Hyatt. All 10 members of the committee are present. No previous notice has been given that the motion to amend something previously adopted would be made at this meeting. What vote is required to amend?
Is it B?
I think
Nope,
it's A.
It's A?
A.
In a committee, if
Oh,
everyone
committee.
who voted for the adopted motion is present, you only need majority vote to adopt the motion to amend something previously adopted. Committees are different.
Mhm.
If everyone who was present is at that committee meeting,
Yes, yes.
then you only need majority vote. Okay? Well, that ends the presentation. And the floor is open for any more questions that you might have about these two motions. Tom?